In this video, we're going to contemplate what it's like to consider the economics of a restructure, not so much the legal or HR point of view, but just the economics and how you go about anticipating what will happen as you try to do a restructure. Restructuring a company normally follows a regular path. It doesn't really matter on the size, but it normally also follows a necessity. So restructuring can occur for two reasons. One is you're downsizing the company from an economic point of view. The other is the company has a lot of opportunity and you're trying to upsize quickly, but you want to model what those changes will be. The majority of this video will be looking at how to restructure for downsizing purposes. If you're new to Labour8, let me explain a few things. Up here you'll see this play button, and that play button has a video. And that video will explain what this report here means, and each of those widgets, those boxes are actually widgets, and when you click on them you can see what the information is inside. Also down the bottom here are these little play buttons, and those are sound recordings. So the I one there relates to the I widget here, and the K play button down here relates to the K widget just here. When you're looking at a particular widget, let's say this one here, E, base redundancy cost by name, as I hover over it, you'll see up here three little icons. If I click the middle one, it's called focus mode, and we focus in, it'll bring that whole part of the report, this widget, into play. Now while I'm here, I just want to explain that you'll hear me interplay the words redundancy and early termination. A lot of people just use the word redundancy, but redundancy is a part of a termination process. Early termination is terminating people's employment with you, and the redundancy calculation would be if they get special financial or allowance provisions additional to their holiday pay and the term they work out with you. So just keep in mind that those terms might be interplayed at certain points in time. So under Dashboard in Labour8 you will find the reports, and each of those reports has different information, and the reports you get vary depending on what status you have as a user. As you saw earlier, in each report are these boxes called widgets, and those widgets house particular pieces of information that relate back to your original data. Now here's an important feature if you're going to restructure a company. What you can see here is a box, but in here you can see two companies. One of them is ghosted. What we have done here is duplicated a company so that we can conduct some modelling. At the moment I'm in the headline figures report, and down here you can see the two companies, the one that I've copied. How you create a copied company so that you can do some modelling is go to the company tab just here, and then select whatever company you want to copy, and you just simply tick that box, and you'll see a duplicate button just here. And when you go in there you can choose whether you want to duplicate the company and staff or just the company on its own. So I've brought two screens into view for you now so that you can see on the left hand side the original company, Cantilever, and on the right hand side I've copied it and you can see the other company. Now that means I can compare these reports. Down here you will see the names of the original people, and over here the same names but just with a copy beside them so that you can reference back and forward. I've already removed 20% of the staff from this firm, so the model over here has 20% less staff, and you can see that by looking in these other widgets here. So this H widget has a total revenue of $320,000, this one has $228,000. I can also duplicate the company more than once, so I could have 2, 3 or 4 different models sitting here that I can work on and compare. When it comes to taking people out and adding them in, you would go into here, this section here, staff, and you would tick on whoever you wanted to change out and remove them under delete. See delete here. Or if you wanted to add them back in because you'd removed them from a model, you would just duplicate them again through here. So let's now focus on my before and my after model. I'll just expand the screen here and we'll go into the original report. And what we'll do now is we'll focus in on this K widget just here, and we'll go to focus mode. What you see here is the contracted hourly rates. These are the hourly rates you normally refer to when you're talking about what you're paying someone. But additional to that, you do have these other costs, things like their superannuation or their workers' insurance, holiday pays, maybe statutory or public holidays, things that group into the sick and sad allowances, their general allowances, and if there's recruitment costs they'll be showing here. So as you look across the line in the original company, you'll see the contracted hourly rate, and as you move across, you'll get to a bigger figure over here. Consider these figures on the right the actual minimums. That's the on-site, I'm at work, hourly minimums that you'll be paying when these people are present. One of the big mistakes that people make is they think that these figures are static. If you look across the line and you see these different entitlements and how they add up to a total down here, all of these parts along here, they move up and down depending on the current situation with that employee. And just to illustrate that point, I've created another graph and we'll go and have a look at that now. I'm just going to show you this graphic so you understand this point. If we had John working for us and he was working 40 hours a week and he was working 52 weeks of the year, that's 2,080 hours a year. And if we're paying him $30 an hour, he is earning $62,400 for those 2,080 hours. And if we consider his employer contribution, let's say it's for his workers' insurance or superannuation, and we'll have it here at 3%, then over that year you're also going to contribute $1,872 as an employer. But he's never going to work the 2,080 hours because he has entitlements, so his time is going to reduce. If we divide the 2,080 by the 1,872, we see that that's costing us an employer contribution 90 cents an hour. Now comes the inverse proportional effect, because as I lower the amount of hours actually worked, this contribution that I'm paying per hour increases. So let me show you. If I decrease it here, you can see it progressively increases. And so my contribution towards that employee, because he is working reduced hours, goes up per hour he's physically at work, to the point where if he physically was at work half the year, then I would be paying a full $1.80 for instead of the 90 cents that we originally calculated. So the point that you need to understand is that all contributions and entitlements and allowances are not static. All of these figures across here will move up, and even other figures that aren't on this page will move up in proportion to the time that the person is not at work, but that they are contracted to be paid. If you look at the bottom of the rows, you can see here my contracted total hourly rates is $1,170, but my at-work physical rate right now is $1,517, and this figure here can vary enormously, so you need to measure it reasonably often. So let's now look at some of the benefits of using Labour8 to help us make our restructuring decisions. So we're still on the headline figures reports for both companies. So we have our original company here and our cloned or duplicated company over here. And what you can see down here, if we look again at the K widget, you can see here we had an original contracted hourly rate of $1,170, or the truer hourly rate at $1,517. But now we can see over here that that $1,517 has dropped down to $1,033. So that shows me that we've shaved off nearly a third of our hourly rate. At first glance, this seems terrific, because I've only laid off 20% of my staff, but I've managed a 30% effective wage decrease. You might want to curb your enthusiasm though, because in some of the reports later on you'll see some other changes that have a cost effect on you. As we can already see, we have two models here, and we already know that we can create more models so that we can model more than one change. So let's assume that you have 3 changes or 3 steps to the restructure you want to do over a year. You can model each one effectively to see what the economic outcome would be. So let's take a look now across the page at some of the other figures. So if we go up here to the I widget, and I'll just focus in on the original company, you can see here that we had an already accrued leave. That's leave that is owed to the staff, therefore money in my bank that is actually owing to the staff of $160,000. So on the new company, we've now managed to lower that to $120,000. So the difference between these two figures, the $40,000, is an approximate early termination figure. So I know I've got to come up with $40,000 to remove the staff that I've selected. Also what we can see is that my new accruing leave in the old model was $185,000, and I've managed to reduce that over the next year by $55,000 to $130,000. And my new total liability for the full year, existing now and in the future, becomes $250,000. So if we continue to look back at the before and after models between the two companies, what we start to see is some other figures as well. So I'll start up here at the B widget. So the B widget here had us paying in the original company 68,848 hours, and now we've dropped that down to 48,000 hours. What we can see here is the losses of time due to entitlements, which is 8,500 hours, and over here we can see that has now dropped down to 630 hours. We can see that the total lost wages for those entitlements here was $498,000, whereas now we've managed to reduce that down to $368,000, and that's quite a drop. We can also see here that our total salary bill, prior to the restructure was $2.5 million. And if we look over here, it is now $1.69 million. Also, we can see that our non-productive or administrative staff, their salary bill was in at $450,000 and it's now down to $329,000. Of particular interest to me though is this widget that looks at the lost revenue due to inefficient time. Inefficient time is where your staff are at work but aren't doing productive things. So here it was $843,000, but now it's $574,000. Now that's a disproportionate outcome. I think if you calculate it out, you'll see a variance, and this is a less attractive figure. The other figures over here, these boxes here, is lost revenue if your staff didn't have their entitlements. Now, of course, that's a lot harder to manage, but you can get some structure back, and we've dropped that from $320,000 to $228,000, and it could possibly be lowered even further. Let's now take a look at the key metric report. So on the left here again, we have our original company and the modelled company that we're working on over on the right. If you look down here at the F widget, you can see that Handy had a CE hourly rate. Now that's the contract plus entitlements hourly rate of $30.43. You might choose to do what's called attribute the cost of your non-productive staff, that's the administrative staff, to the hourly rates of your productive staff. And if you were to do that, you can see across here in this line, the division across the hours that Handy is going to work in a year. And we would have to add on an extra $5.31 to his hourly rate to get an effective hourly rate that also attributed the cost of the administrative staff. Moving on from that, let's have a look up here at widget A. So with widget A, we can see the base yearly projected salary for everyone was $2.5 million. So one of the questions for your restructuring is, what's it cost me in early terminations? So if you take a look at this widget here, the E widget, you will see here that if I was to compare Adrian, we would see that Adrian's early termination cost would be around $25,000, and if Barry had the same role, his one would be $6,900. So depending on your cash position, you would want to go through and compare which people would have an effect on that current cash position. But keep in mind that early termination cost does not go away, it just means that you've delayed it for a future date. So if you add up the early termination cost of each of the people that you would like to lay off, you can get an idea of what the total cash position will be before and after you've done your restructure. And this is an important part of figuring out what is an economic restructure as opposed to a, say, legal, HR or emotional one. Let's now consider the before and after availability report. So on the left again we have the original company. Now not all the widgets in here are necessary for restructure. So if we compare first of all the F widget down here, there's 65,000 hours available there. But over here, productive hours available is now $44,000, and that's a reduction of greater than 20%. As you're probably aware, availability relates to the available hours. So if you're going to make money, then staff actually have to physically be at work. And we can see the before and after here and compare the staff members here by just clicking in these boxes and moving up and down and then comparing them over here to the available hours we've got. So those available hours are going to have a big impact on what we can do as far as billing at our staff or our staff being available to do productive work. Each of the staff has a theoretical amount of hours worked, which you can see here. Then we would have to consider what their holidays are and what they will take off. Also public holidays, and then of course any accrued leave that they've got in play. And this gives us an overall picture before and after of what our contracted hours are compared to our lost hours due to holidays. And our total hours are seen in this box just here. One thing that employers fail to recognise is that when your staff are on holiday or on leave, they're actually accruing the next lot of leave as well, because an employment agreement talks about the hours employed, not the hours physically at work. So your staff are accruing leave when they're on leave, and this is something to be aware of, and that cost could be a heavy burden. It also reduces the available productive time for the following year. While we're on availability, I just want to mention something else that's important. So you can see that people get holiday leave, typically 4 weeks a year, so you can see the hours there for the 4 weeks, and then of course they get public holidays as well. So those become part of their entitlements. When they don't use that leave for a while, it adds up, it gets accrued, and here's the hours here that are currently owing. So there is 4,700 hours of staff leave that is currently available to them that we have to pay for, so they take the time off and we're going to have to pay for that leave. What I'd like to do now is look at the inefficiency report. So we have the before one here and the after one. And what we can see here is 9,151 hours that are inefficient. Now that 9,000 hours relates to when your staff are at work but not doing productive work, which contrasts with where they have entitlements where they are being paid by you but they are not at work. So if we now look at the headline figures, we can see here that we have $320,000 that's been lost revenue due to entitlements, but what is worse, we have $843,000 here in revenue that is being lost because of these inefficient hours. So an important widget here is the B one, because what it shows is the total lost revenue due to those inefficiencies. So the 9,000 hours you're losing here is costing that in revenue. If you want to know who your worst offenders are, they will be boxed into each of these widgets here, so you can see them pop out by person. But further along, once you get through those, you can see them here by role, so you can actually see which categories or roles make the largest inefficiencies. To drill down further, you should go into the L widget here. In this example here, we can see a construction model. We can see that they're free quoting hours, possibly waiting time. We can see who our worst offenders are and what they add up to for total time spent in doing free quoting, and in this case it's 1,000 hours a year. Then we have organising hours, where they're organising jobs but in an unpaid fashion, and we have meeting hours, travel hours that aren't paid for, education hours, possibly for apprentices and postgrad work, and then we have health and safety issues and other hours. So as you can see, we're losing 9,000 hours, which represents $843,000 of lost revenue. The boxes on the outside show our worst offenders, and then up here our worst offenders by role types. And then over here we can see our summaries for where those figures come from. So that total of $843,000 should become a target, particularly if you're an advisor, to work with your client on. Inefficiencies are easy to reduce if you endorse things like systems, software, outsourcing, charging for free things, and there are many other approaches that you could take to help them reduce that amount and make more money. Now we'll move on to compare the losses before and after. Consider losses in two fashions. One is economic and the other is hours. Straight away you can see that we brought through the inefficiency time losses into widget A here, which was 9,000 hours previously and now it's down to 6,400. If you look at widget B and C, you can start to see the difference in losses due to entitlement. So here 16,000 hours, over here 12,000. And it's really easy to spot the biggest offenders, because if you look over here, adjacent to this table is this patchwork, and the patchwork shows the biggest blocks or the people involved who are making those losses. Same down here, if you go and look at these two widgets here, D and E, the table here relates to the patchwork here, so you can see the immediate offenders here, and then you can drill down into the data over here. Now the D widget's really interesting because we can see person by person what the inefficiency dollar losses are, and that helps us to analyse and go, who should we work on first, and also to think about it as a role. So which roles are making the biggest losses or the biggest inefficiencies, and therefore why am I losing that revenue? So one of the beauties of using Labour8 to model your restructure is that in the before and after we might see some misfit information. And in this case, one that strikes me is this true potential revenue. As you can see down here, it was prior to the restructure $3.3 million, but after the restructure it drops down to $2.098 million. Now that's quite a big difference considering we've only reduced our staff by 20%. It shows that we have a bigger impact on our revenue than we might first have considered. This presents you with a problem because in theory, if you carried the slimmest amount of staff and totally maximise their productivity, you're still likely to have a profit level that is 30% down. To stem the losses, I need to be focused on productivity, because productivity is the time and the billable time that people use that gives me the profit and revenue that I need. So first of all, if you look on the A widget on the original company, we can see the potential monthly billable revenue for each staff member, so we can roll down here and look at those. Now that revenue in the A widget takes into account the time that the staff won't be available in the coming years, so this gives a very clear picture on what the revenue from each person is likely to be. In the restructured company on the right in widget A, I've made my selections and we can see what the revenue will be now. For an easy spotter, the best thing to do is just look at my best performers by looking in the patchwork, so I can see who my best performers were and what they would make me as a monthly revenue here, and I can compare it over here and see what those revenues will be. Now a drastic change has occurred in my revenue, and you can see here the potential revenue of $3.3 million previous to making the structural changes, and now that I've restructured, I'm down to $2.1 million. And that's going to be driven partly by what I can make as a margin out of the individuals that I've chosen. So you'll see here that my highest performers, there's 30% gross margin, and we've got a gross margin here of 26%. But what I've done is I've laid those people off, and now I can see that, gee, I'm down to 19% here, and my second best 17%. So that means that I might not have selected the right people to ensure the ongoing profitability of my business. So now I'm faced with a dilemma. Do I bring in the more profitable people that are already laid off into the new restructured model? Or do I go back to these staff and see if I can renegotiate their hourly rates? Or do I move some of these staff onto being contractors so that my profitability is maintained? So at this point, you choose whether you took the original company and you chose to clone that company or duplicate it once again. So you'd go in, find the original company and duplicate it and go through the process and reselect your people. And this would mean that you'd have multiple models running that you could structure. Or you could choose to persist with this model but change some of your staff selections, in which case you would once again go and find someone who had been cut out of the picture, tick on them, go up to duplicate and copy that person into the other company. And then you'd go and find the other people that you'd laid off. Once you've copied that person, you can choose which model has that person in permanently, and possibly them both, and experiment by deleting other people and seeing what that outcome would be. We know that productivity is tied into the hours that people are available, and the hours that they are available has an impact on our revenue, and we have the before and after revenue report. Let's first focus on the desired charge-out rate in the C widget. Earlier on in the video, I discussed how we came out at a more realistic hourly rate for every physical hour someone's at work, and this is the contract plus entitlement hourly rate. When it comes to making margin on staff, you have to consider it in the same way that a store would in buying items from overseas. So if I bought an item in China for say $3 and it cost me $2 to import, the true cost would be $5, and then I'd choose what margin I want to make on top of that. So the true cost for your labour is in here, and the margin you want to make is over here. So the margin on top of $43 would bring us double to $86.20. And the difference against the current rate, which is $60, means that we're $26.20 short. So now that we've established what margin we want to make, or we can at least consider the margin we're actually making on people, we then want to turn our attention to what we're making per hour out of each individual. So what you can see again is the before and after chart on each side of the screen, and you can see the gaps here between our current charge out rate and if we were to make our margin that we desired, what we should be charging them out at. On the original company in the D widget, you can see that the line actually touches or crosses at 2 points. And on the new company, apart from 1 point here, we're pretty well making some margin on every individual. Now that's a good sign. That might not be as good total profit as it was before, but at least we know we're making money on each individual. So moving on now, let's compare the difference between the theoretical maximum revenue in widget E, the theoretical probable revenue, and the theoretical staff maximum profit. So what are the key differences? Well, the F widget takes into account the probable time that the people will have off over the next year and displays the profit according to that. But what this doesn't take into account is the salaries, wages or allowances of those people. And so over here is our more likely revenue and profit from each of those individual people. And what you can see is that Max is the top here, Barry is the top here, and then if we go down we can see Basil's the top one here. And you should consider this when looking at restructuring, because you don't want to take the risk of laying off your more profitable staff. When comparing the patchworks on both sides, the before and the after, you might also want to consider the roles that each of these individuals play and how the accumulative roles might affect your revenue. Just as a side topic, I'm just going to go to the industry comparison report and show you how you compared roles. For those of you that have the option, you can compare roles to your average rate and the industry average rate as well, which also means you can compare things like your normal charge out rate. So you can see here this company has a usual charge out rate of $55 an hour, but the industry average is $58.46. I now want to move on to attributions. So two important things in attributions. Number one is you can see Carter here and the copy of Carter for the new company. And what we've effectively got is the same hourly rate or true hourly rate. moving some staff onto being contractors, which will change this rate, and or if possible, see if you can negotiate a lower hourly rate so that you can build in some better margin. If staff can see the long-term viability of the company, they may be open to a reduction in salaries. If not, then move down here to the B widget and we'll just focus in on that. What you can see very quickly is the current charge out rate, which is the blue line, and the minimum hourly rate, which is the lowest truer cost of what those staff cost you. And by looking along the line, you can see the variance and where you're making most money out of which individuals. So it's a case of lowering the costs, which is the staff salaries, or increasing the charge out rates and or increasing your business efficiency. Okay, so that was a pretty good grounding in how to use Labour8 to help you restructure a company. And when you've got to this point, then you can continue the process. So you might go through to company here, and you can see we've got our two companies, the original one and our copied one. And we could copy the copy again by going duplicate, or we can make another model off the original one here by going duplicate. Or if we've decided that we want to move staff in and out of this operation, then we can go to the staff section, and you'll see here that we've got Barry and Barry copy. So Barry will copy through to the original Barry. See here Adrian has been removed, but if we want to copy Adrian again and put him back into that model, we just go here and we go duplicate. So there you have it, a very good modelling tool that helps you to look at the economic outcomes of doing a restructure. Don't forget that this can be used equally as well for growing a company and deciding on which role should be fitted into the organisation to optimise growth. So where to next? Well, you have already looked at how you can lower your operational costs, and in Labour8 you have looked at lowering your staff costs. To help you implement your economic plan, you will want to involve HR and, if you're a large company, your legal team. This is so that you avoid personal grievance cases after you have restructured your firm. Your payroll team should also form part of this group. After consulting with them, if you find that you need to change some of your staff selections, then do so in Labour8 so that you can see the overall cost implications of these decisions. Remember, this is an optimisation tool that will help you project likely outcomes. I would also advise you to revisit Labour8 afterwards, say a month after the dust has settled. This will help you to maximise your profit. Finally, if you haven't already seen my video on the theory of restructuring, you may want to watch this as well. If you're not already a customer of Labour8, you should realise by now that Labour8 is a highly valuable tool for regularly measuring your profitability. We advise our clients to run the figures at least every 3 months. Don't forget to recommend us to your accountants and your business friends. Thank you for watching. I'm Lester Bryant.